In the darkness before dawn on June 17, 1967, in the mountains west of Nui Dat, Phuoc Tuy Province, South Vietnam, 6 Australian SAS soldiers lie motionless in the mud beside a jungle trail, their faces painted green and black, their breathing slow and controlled through their nooses, their eyes locked on the narrow path 15 feet away where the Viet Cong will walk in approximately 40 minutes, if the intelligence is correct, if the reconnaissance observations hold true, if the enemy has not changed their pattern. These 6 men have been in this exact position for 11 hours. They have not spoken a single word. They have not moved, except to shift a finger 1 inch, to blink away a mosquito, to track the distant sound of mortar fire with their eyes alone. One of them, the patrol commander, a sergeant from a sheep station in rural Queensland, has his right hand resting on a small green firing device, connected by a thin wire to a claymore mine positioned on the trail. His finger does not touch the trigger. Not yet. The claymore faces the trail at knee height, packed with 700 steel balls and plastic explosive, aimed to spray death across a 60-degree arc. Behind the commander, 5 men wait with L1A1 rifles, safeties off, magazines loaded with 20 rounds of 7.62 mm ammunition, every muzzle pointing at the killing zone they have memorized in daylight and darkness. They do not fidget. They do not scratch the leeches attached to their necks. They do not shift their weight or adjust their gear. They have become part of the jungle, indistinguishable from the logs and ferns and shadows. And when the Viet Cong come walking down that trail in 40 minutes, smoking cigarettes, talking in low voices, rifles slung over their shoulders, they will not know the Australians are there until the world explodes in fire and steel and sea shadows vanish into the green before the smoke clears. If you want to understand how a handful of soldiers made an entire enemy force change the way they moved, the routes they used, and the confidence they carried, stay with me. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It's not Hollywood drama. It's declassified history, verified testimony, and captured enemy documents that prove the Australian SAS in Vietnam perfected a tactic the Viet Cong could not counter. This is Vietnam War Records, and this is the story of the silent soldiers who turned patience into a weapon and the jungle into a trap. If this story matters to you, if you believe real history deserves to be told, hit that subscribe button now, because what follows will change how you understand this war. The Vietnam War, as most people know it, is an American story. It is a story of helicopters and napalm, of massive search and destroy operations, of young conscripts from small towns in America sent into a jungle they do not understand to fight an enemy they cannot see. It is a story of overwhelming firepower, of artillery barrages that turn hillsides into moonscapes, of B-52 strikes that crater the earth for miles. It is a story of body counts and kill ratios, of officers measuring success by the number of enemy dead, regardless of whether those operations achieve any strategic objective. The American military machine in Vietnam is designed for conventional warfare, for facing Soviet tank divisions on the plains of Europe, for engaging enemies that wear uniforms and hold territory, and fight in ways that military academies have studied for centuries. But the jungle of Vietnam is not Europe. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army are not a conventional force. They do not hold ground for the sake of holding it. They do not mass formations for American artillery to destroy. They disappear. They blend into the population, into the jungle, into the night. They strike without warning and vanish before reinforcements arrive. And for much of the war, the Americans struggle to adapt. They bring their doctrine, their equipment, their methods, and they apply them with determination and courage, but the jungle does not care about doctrine. The jungle belongs to those who understand it, who respect it, who move through it like water through stone. But in one province, in one corner of South Vietnam, a different army is fighting a different war. In Phuoc Tuy Province, 80 kilometers east of Saigon, the Australians have established a base at Nui Dat, a cluster of low hills surrounded by jungle, rubber plantations, and rice paddies. The 1st Australian Task Force, approximately 7,000 men at its peak, operates under a doctrine that is not American. It is a doctrine learned in blood and patience in the jungles of Malaya during the 1950s, when Australian and British forces defeated a communist insurgency through small unit tactics, intelligence gathering, population control, and a weapon the communists could not counter: the ambush. The Australians in Vietnam are not interested in sweeping through the jungle with battalions, hoping to make contact. They are interested in control, in making the enemy afraid to move, in owning the night and the trails and the silence. They send out patrols of 4 to 6 men, small teams that slip into the jungle and disappear for a week or more, watching, listening, gathering intelligence, and when the moment is perfect, When the enemy walks into the trap, they strike with surgical precision and vanish before the enemy understands what happened. The men who do this work are not ordinary infantry. They are the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, the SAS, an elite unit of volunteers selected through a brutal course that breaks 80 to 90% of candidates. The men who pass are endurance athletes, expert marksmen, skilled navigators, and above all, they are patient. Patience is the hardest skill to teach and the most critical to master. Any soldier can pull a trigger. Any soldier can march through the jungle with a rifle. But to sit in the mud for 72 hours without moving, without speaking, without revealing your presence, while insects crawl over your skin and leeches suck your blood and the enemy walks past you close enough to touch, that requires a kind of discipline that cannot be trained, only selected for. The SAS soldiers are hunters. Many of them come from rural Australia, from farms and stations where they grew up tracking animals, moving quietly through the bush, understanding the rhythms of nature. They bring that knowledge to Vietnam, and they apply it with deadly efficiency. Phuoc Tuy Province is the Australian area of operations, assigned to them by the American command. It is not a large province, roughly 1,500 square kilometers, but it is strategically important. Route 15, the main highway from Saigon to the coastal city of Vung Tau, runs through it. The province is a mix of terrain, dense triple canopy jungle in the mountains to the west and north, rubber plantations in the central areas, rice paddies and villages in the lowlands, and coastal hills to the east. The population is about 100,000 Vietnamese civilians, scattered in villages, many of which are under Viet Cong control or influence. The enemy forces in the province are formidable. The 274th and 275th Viet Cong regiments, each over 2,000 strong, operate in the area, along with the D445 Provincial Battalion, a local force of 500 to 800 troops, and numerous village guerrilla units. These are not poorly trained peasants with old rifles. These are experienced soldiers, many of them veterans of the war against the French, men who have been fighting in this jungle for years, who know every trail, every village, every hiding place. They move at night, navigate by memory, and strike with confidence. For years they have been the hunters, ambushing South Vietnamese and American forces, melting into the jungle before reinforcements arrive. But when the Australians arrive in 1966, the dynamic begins to shift. The difference between the American and Australian approach is not about courage or competence. American soldiers are brave, well-trained, and determined. But they are fighting with a doctrine designed for a different war. A typical American infantry patrol in Vietnam consists of 12 to 20 men, heavily armed, moving through the jungle with the expectation that they will be heard, and that is acceptable because they can call in artillery or helicopter gunships within minutes. The tactic is reactive. Make contact, establish a base of fire, call for support, overwhelm the enemy with firepower. It works when the enemy stands and fights, but the Viet Cong rarely do. They hit and run, ambush and disappear, and the Americans spend their time chasing shadows. The Australians do not chase. They position themselves where the enemy will come, and they wait. This is the fundamental difference, and it is rooted in experience. In the 1950s, the British and Australians fought a communist insurgency in Malaya, a jungle war against an enemy that used the same tactics as the Viet Cong. The Malayan emergency lasted 12 years, and by the end, the communists were defeated, not by firepower, but by small unit patrols, intelligence gathering, ambushes, and population control. The lessons were codified, written into doctrine, and passed down. When the Australians deploy to Vietnam, they bring that institutional knowledge with them. They know how to fight this kind of war. The Americans are learning as they go. The Australians already know. An Australian SAS patrol in Vietnam operates with a precision that borders on ritual. The mission begins with intelligence. Reports come in from other patrols, from villagers, from radio intercepts, from aerial reconnaissance. A pattern emerges. Enemy movement in a certain area, a trail being used regularly, a suspected supply route. The patrol is tasked with reconnaissance, and, if the opportunity presents, the patrol is small, usually 4 to 6 men, led by a sergeant or a junior officer. Each man carries approximately 30 kilograms of equipment: rifle, ammunition, grenades, water, rations, radio, medical supplies, and personal gear. They carry no tents, no sleeping bags, no comfort items. They sleep on the ground, eat cold rations, and move slowly. The insertion is usually by helicopter, a quick landing in a clearing or a jungle LZ, and the patrol disappears into the green within seconds. From that moment, they are silent. No voices above a whisper. No smoking. No fires. Communication is by hand signals during the day and tap codes at night. The radio is used sparingly, only for scheduled check-ins with base, brief, and coded. The patrol moves through the jungle at a pace that would frustrate an American unit. They cover perhaps 3 to 5 kilometers a day, stopping every 50 to 100 meters to listen, to observe, to ensure they are not being followed. The point man leads, scanning for trails, for signs of the enemy, for danger. Behind him, the scout moves with the radio. Then the patrol commander. Then the medic. Then the rear security, walking backward every few minutes to check for pursuit. They move in single file, stepping carefully, avoiding twigs, moving through vegetation rather than around it to leave no obvious trail. They stop frequently, sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour, sitting in silence, listening to the jungle. The jungle is never quiet. Birds call, insects buzz, monkeys crash through the canopy. But underneath that noise, there are other sounds, sounds that do not belong. Voices, footsteps, the clink of metal on metal. The patrol listens for those sounds. They also watch for signs, broken branches, footprints in the mud, cigarette butts, discarded food, fresh digging. The direction bent grass is leaning. The color of broken vegetation which tells you how recently it was disturbed. Everything is information. Everything is intelligence. After 2 or 3 days, the patrol finds what they are looking for, a trail, recently used, showing signs of regular traffic. They do not ambush immediately, they watch. They position themselves in concealment 50 meters from the trail and observe for a day, sometimes 2. They note the times the enemy moves. Early morning just after dawn, late afternoon before dusk. They note the size of the groups, 4 men, 8 men, 12 men. They note the discipline. Are they talking? Are they smoking? Are they alert, weapons ready? Or relaxed, rifles slung? They note the direction of travel, the loads they carry. Are they combat troops on patrol or porters carrying supplies? All of this information is recorded, radioed back to base, and analyzed. And when the pattern is confirmed, when the intelligence is solid, the patrol prepares the ambush. The ambush site is selected with care. The ideal site forces the enemy to slow down or bunch up. A stream crossing, a narrow section of trail, a bend, a place where a fallen tree creates an obstacle. The site must offer concealment for the patrol, thick vegetation, shadows, natural cover. It must have good fields of fire into the killing zone, clear lines of sight for every rifle. It must have escape routes, multiple directions the patrol can withdraw if things go wrong. And ideally, it is within artillery range of the Australian base, so fire support can be called if the patrol is compromised. The Australians prefer an L-shaped ambush. The long leg of the L runs parallel to the trail, with 3 or 4 men positioned along it, their rifles covering the length of the killing zone. The short leg of the L, the cutoff group, is positioned at one end, usually 1 or 2 men. Their job to stop any enemy who tries to escape in that direction. The commander positions himself at the corner of the L, where he has the best view of the entire killing zone and can control the initiation. The patrol moves into position in the late afternoon, during the heat of the day, when the jungle is quiet and the enemy is resting. The final 200 meters take over an hour. They move 1 man at a time, freezing at any sound, any movement. The final positions are selected carefully. Each man finds a spot behind a log, under thick vegetation in a depression in the ground, anywhere that offers cover and concealment. They arrange their gear silently, securing everything so nothing rattles or clinks. They place their rifles, check their magazines, ensure their grenades are accessible. The commander places the Claymore mines, the M18A1, a curved, rectangular block of plastic explosive packed with 700 steel balls. He positions them on the trail 10 to 20 meters out, angled to spray the killing zone at knee-to-chest height. He runs the detonating wire back to his position, tests the clacker, the firing device, to ensure it works, and then conceals the wire under leaves and dirt. The Claymore is a devastating weapon. When it detonates, the steel balls spray out in a 60-degree arc, shredding everything in there. Path out to 50 meters. A single Claymore can kill or wound a dozen men. The Australians sometimes place 2 or 3 spaced along the trail to cover the entire killing zone. Once the ambush is set, the waiting begins. This is the test, the crucible that separates the SAS from ordinary soldiers. Hours pass. The afternoon fades into evening. The light changes, the shadows lengthen, the jungle comes alive with the sounds of dusk. Insects swarm. Mosquitoes land on exposed skin, on faces, on hands, and bite. The soldiers do not swat them. Movement attracts attention. Leeches, fat black slugs that drop from leaves and crawl across the ground, attach to necks, wrists, ankles, and begin to feed. The soldiers do not pull them off. Ants, aggressive red ants, crawl over boots, up legs, and bite with stinging mandibles. The soldiers endure it. The heat is oppressive, the humidity so thick it feels like drowning. Sweat soaks through uniforms, runs down faces, stings eyes. The soldiers do not wipe it away. They breathe slowly, shallowly, controlling their heart rate, suppressing the urge to move, to scratch, to adjust position. They become part of the environment. Just another shadow, another shape in the undergrowth. Their eyes scan slowly, tracking movement, but their heads do not turn. Their fingers rest near triggers, but they do not fidget. They are statues. Night falls, the jungle darkens, the sounds change. The daybirds go silent, replaced by nightbirds, frogs, and the rustling of nocturnal animals. The temperature drops slightly, but the humidity remains. The soldiers take turns on watch. 2 men awake, the others resting but not sleeping deeply, ready to wake instantly. The watch rotates every 2 hours. If communication is necessary, they use taps on the shoulder. 1 tap, enemy approaching. 2 taps, hold position. 3 taps, withdraw. No voices, no movement. The radio remains silent unless there is an emergency. Radio signals can be intercepted. Direction-finding equipment can triangulate a position. Silence is survival. Dawn comes slowly, the darkness fading to gray, then to the pale green light that filters through the triple canopy jungle. This is stand 2, the most dangerous time of day. The enemy moves at dawn and dusk, using the low light for cover, and the patrol knows this. Every man is awake now, fully alert, weapon ready, eyes scanning the trail. The jungle is loud with the morning chorus of birds and insects, but underneath that noise, there are other sounds, faint at first, then growing clearer. Voices. Low voices, speaking Vietnamese, not whispering, but conversing quietly. Footsteps. The soft thud of boots or sandals on the trail. The clink of metal, a rifle sling, a canteen. The enemy is coming. The commander raises his hands slowly, fingers spread. The signal, enemy in sight. The patrol freezes. No one moves. No one breathes. Through the vegetation, 20 meters away, shapes appear on the trail. 4 men, then 6, then 8. Viet Cong soldiers, young men. Men in dark green or black uniforms, some wearing the distinctive pith helmets, others in soft caps, their feet in rubber sandals made from old tires. They carry AK-47s and SKS rifles, packs on their backs, rolls of gear slung across their chests. They are talking quietly, not whispering, their voices carrying through the still morning air. They are not on high alert. They are comfortable moving through familiar territory, a trail they have used many times before without incident. They do not expect danger. They walk into the killing zone. The lead soldier passes the first claymore mine. Oblivious, his eyes on the trail ahead. The second soldier follows, then the third. The commander watches, counting. His hand on the firing clacker, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. He does not squeeze. Not yet. He is waiting. The fourth soldier enters the center of the killing zone. The fifth is just behind him. The sixth, the seventh. The commander is looking for the leader, the man with the radio, the man carrying the map or giving quiet instructions. The eighth soldier has an antenna sticking up from his pack. Radio operator. Priority target. The ninth soldier is gesturing as he talks, giving instructions to the man beside him. Commander or squad leader. The rear of the column is entering the L now, moving into the field of fire of the cutoff group. 11 men, 12. The entire squad is in the killing zone. The commander squeezes the clacker. The claymore detonates with a flat, violent crack that echoes through the jungle, a sound like thunder compressed into a fraction of a second. The steel balls spray out in a wave, tearing through flesh, bone, vegetation, equipment. Men are thrown backward, shredded, killed instantly, or mortally wounded in the first heartbeat. Before the echo fades, the rifles open fire. The Australians fire in controlled bursts. 2, 3 rounds, shift target, fire again. The L shape means the Viet Cong are caught in a crossfire, bullets coming from 2 directions, from the side and from the front. There is no cover. There is no escape. Some of the enemy soldiers go down immediately, hit multiple times, dead, before they understand what is happening. Others dive for the ground, trying to find cover, trying to return fire, but they cannot see the attackers. The Australians are invisible, concealed behind logs and vegetation, their muzzle flashes hidden in shadow. A few Viet Cong try to run back down the trail, but the cutoff group fires and they go down. One soldier tries to unsling his rifle to bring it up, but he is hit in the chest and collapses. Another tries to crawl off the trail into the jungle, but a burst from an L1A1 stitches across his back and he goes still. The ambush lasts 15 seconds, maybe 20. Then the commander raises his fist, the signal. Cease fire. The rifles go silent. The jungle is suddenly quiet except for the ringing. In ears, the moans of wounded enemy soldiers, the crackling of small fires where tracer rounds ignited dry vegetation. The commander signals again. The chopping motion, withdraw. The patrol moves immediately, not running, but moving quickly, deliberately, along the pre-planned escape route. The rear security man, the last in line, places a final claymore mine on the trail behind them, the wire running back 50 meters to a tree, where he ties it off with a pressure release. If anyone follows, if anyone trips the wire, the mine detonates. The patrol moves in leapfrog fashion, one man covering while the others move, then the next man covering, always watching their back trail, always listening for pursuit. Within 2 minutes, they are 200 meters from the ambush site. Within 5 minutes, they are 500 meters away, moving through dense jungle where the vegetation closes behind them, leaving no obvious trail. On the trail, the scene is carnage. Bodies lie sprawled in the mud, blood pooling around them, soaking into the earth. Weapons are scattered, packs are torn open, their contents strewn across the trail. Some of the soldiers are dead, killed instantly by the claymore or the rifle fire. Others are wounded, crying out, gasping, bleeding. One man, hit in the legs, tries to crawl off the trail, dragging himself toward the jungle. Another lies on his back, staring at the canopy, his breath coming in short, wet gasps, blood bubbling from his mouth. The jungle is silent except for their sounds. No one comes to help. Not yet. The survivors, if there are any who are unwounded, are in shock, terrified, disoriented. They do not know how many attacked them. They did not see the enemy. They only heard the explosion, felt the impact of bullets, and then it was over. Minutes later, the sound of movement in the jungle. Reinforcements, other Viet Cong soldiers, rushing toward the sound of the explosion, weapons ready, expecting to find the enemy, to engage, to fight. They find only the dead and wounded. No blood trail from the attackers, no spent brass casings, because the Australians use rifles that eject casings into the jungle, not onto the trail. And they police their positions before withdrawing. No footprints leading away, because the patrol has already begun counter-tracking, concealing their withdrawal. The Australians have vanished. This is not an isolated incident. This happens again and again and again. In the Hat Dick Mountains, in the long green jungle corridor, along Route 15, in the Mae Tao Range, in the rubber plantations, the Australian SAS patrols strike and disappear. The Viet Cong begin to realize something is wrong. They begin to lose men on trails they have used for years without incident. They begin to find ambush sites where there is no sign of who did it or where they went. They begin to hear reports from survivors. Terrified men who describe explosions from nowhere, bullets from unseen guns, and then, silence. The enemy begins to change their behavior. Captured documents, declassified decades after the war, confirm this. A directive from the Viet Cong Regional Force Command in Phuoc Tuy Province, dated mid-1967, warns cotters to avoid certain areas, to increase reconnaissance before movement, to travel in smaller groups. The directive specifically mentions the silent soldiers and warns that they do not move like the Americans. They are patient. They wait. Another document, a report from the VC 274th Regiment, states that Australian troops are more careful and patient than the Americans. They do not move in large numbers. They are difficult to detect. Catters are instructed to increase vigilance in areas of Australian activity. A third document, from the D445 Provincial Battalion, orders units to avoid movement on known trails during daylight. The silent soldiers have ambushed multiple supply columns, use alternate routes and increase scout elements. Enemy radio intercepts, recorded and translated by Australian intelligence, contain similar references. In one intercepted conversation, a Viet Cong commander requests permission to avoid a specific grid square, explaining that the ghost soldiers operate in that area and his unit has lost too many men. In another intercept, a field unit reports an ambush and requests reinforcements, but adds that by the time help arrives, the enemy will be gone. They always are. The psychological impact is war is not just about killing. It is about morale, fear, and the will to fight. The Viet Cong and NVA are tough, disciplined, ideologically committed soldiers. But they are human. They feel fear. And they feel it most acutely when they cannot see their enemy, when they are struck without warning, when their friends die and there is no one to shoot back at because the attackers are already gone. Interviews with Viet Cong defectors, conducted under the Q Hoi program, provide first-hand accounts. One defector, a VC soldier named Win Van Min, who surrendered in 1968, describes his experience. "We were told the Australians were like the Americans, but they were not. They moved like us, silently. We could not hear them. One night my unit was ambushed on a trail we had used for months. The explosion came from nowhere. Half my comrades died in seconds. We never saw who attacked us. After that, I was afraid to move on trails. I was afraid to move at night. I did not want to die without even seeing the enemy." Another defector, Tran Duc Tan, a VC company commander who surrendered in 1969, says, "The Australians understood the jungle as we did. They did not try to conquer it with machines, they used it against us. My men feared moving in daylight on trails. We lost many good soldiers to Australian ambushes. I could not protect them because I did not know where the enemy was until it was too late." The Viet Cong adapt, but every adaptation has a cost. They begin avoiding traditional trails, moving cross-country through thick jungle. This slows them down, exhausts them, and increases the time required for even simple movements. A journey that once took 4 hours now takes 8 or 10. They begin traveling in smaller groups, 4 or 6 men instead of squads or platoons. This makes them harder to detect, but it also reduces their combat effectiveness. A small group cannot fight if ambushed. They can only run or die. They increase reconnaissance, sending scouts ahead, sometimes an hour or two in advance of the main body. This provides warning, but it also slows movement, and sometimes the scouts are the ones who trigger the ambush, dying while the main body escapes. They reduce radio communication, fearing direction-finding equipment, but this hampers coordination and makes command and control difficult. Every adjustment they make to counter the Australian tactics weakens them in some other way. The Australians do not need to kill every enemy soldier. They only need to make the jungle unsafe, to make movement costly, to force the enemy to waste time and resources avoiding them. This is the strategic effect of small unit tactics. 6 men, operating for 2 weeks, can influence the behavior of an entire regiment. The tactic works because it denies the enemy the ability to respond. In a conventional firefight, both sides shoot at each other. The enemy can return fire, can maneuver, can fight back, can claim a small victory even in defeat because they inflicted casualties. But in an Australian ambush, the enemy has no opportunity to respond. The attack is total, overwhelming, and over before they understand what is happening. And then the attackers are gone, vanished into the jungle, leaving the enemy with only the dead and the fear. This denial of response is psychologically devastating. The Viet Cong are used to being the hunters, to setting the terms of engagement, to striking and fading. The Australians turn that dynamic on its head. The VC become the hunted. They become the ones who walk into traps. They become the ones who die without understanding how or why. The Australian counter-tracking techniques compound the psychological impact. After an ambush, the patrol withdraws along a pre-planned route, but they do not simply run. They move carefully, deliberately, concealing their trail. One of the most effective techniques is walking backward in their own boot prints. After moving 50 or 100 meters from the ambush site, the patrol stops. One man walks backward, carefully placing his feet in the boot prints they just made, for 20 or 30 meters. This creates the illusion that the patrol came from the direction they are withdrawing toward, not from the ambush site. It confuses trackers who follow the trail and then lose it when the prints reverse. Another technique is stream walking. The patrol enters a stream or river and walks in the water for 200-500 meters, sometimes more. Water washes away footprints and scent. They exit the stream on hard rock or gravel, leaving no print, and continue in a different direction. Sometimes they exit and re-enter the stream multiple times to confuse trackers. They use fallen logs as bridges, walking along the trunk to avoid leaving prints on soft ground. They step only on rocks, on hard-packed earth, on exposed roots. They brush over their tracks with cut branches, scattering leaves and debris to create a natural appearance. They create false trails, walking 50 meters in an obvious direction, then returning backward in the same prints and turning 90 degrees onto hard ground. A tracker follows the false trail, loses it, and wastes hours searching. These techniques are not new. The Australians learned them in Malaya. And before that, British soldiers learned them in colonial campaigns. And before that, scouts and hunters used them for centuries. But in Vietnam, against an enemy who are themselves expert trackers, these techniques are critical. The Viet Cong send trackers after every contact. They are good trackers, experienced woodsmen, often Montagnard tribesmen from the Central Highlands who grew up hunting in the jungle. But the Australians are better. Time and again, the trackers lose the trail. Time and again, they return empty-handed, reporting that the enemy disappeared, that the tracks simply ended. This adds to the mythology, to the fear. The Australians are ghosts. They appear, they kill, they vanish. One Australian SAS soldier, interviewed decades after the war, describes the patience required. We'd sit for 72 hours without moving. Not a word, not a sound. You'd watch ants crawl over your hand and not brush them off. You'd feel a leech on your neck, getting fatter as it sucked your blood, and you'd leave it there. Because if you moved, if you made a sound, the enemy might hear you. And if they heard you, you'd lose the ambush. Or worse, you'd walk into their ambush. So you waited. You became part of the jungle. You breathed with it, moved with it, or didn't move at all. And when the enemy walked past, when they were talking and smoking and relaxed, you didn't shoot the first man. You didn't shoot the second. You waited for the commander, the radio man, the leaders. You waited for the moment when the whole group was in the kill zone, when they were bunched up, when they had no chance. Then you hit them. Then you disappeared. Another soldier, a patrol commander, describes the doctrine. The Americans wanted to find and destroy. They wanted to go out, make contact, call in the firepower. That's a valid tactic for a conventional war. But this wasn't a conventional war. The enemy didn't hold ground. They didn't mass for battle. They hit and ran. So we flipped the script. We didn't go looking for them. We let them come to us. We found their trails, their patterns, their habits. We set the trap. We controlled the engagement. We decided when to fight, where to fight, and when to withdraw. They reacted to us, not the other way around. That was the track. Difference. That was why it worked. The statistics bear this out. Over the 5 years the Australian SAS operates in Vietnam, from 1966 to 1971, the squadrons conduct an estimated 1,200 patrol insertions. Each patrol averages 7 to 10 days in the field. Each patrol is 4 to 6 men. The total man days in enemy territory exceed 50,000. And in those 50,000 man days, the SAS kills an estimated 500 to 700 enemy soldiers, possibly more. The exact number is impossible to verify because many ambushes are not followed up. The patrol withdraws, the enemy collects their dead, and the only confirmation is the blood on the trail and the intelligence reports. But the conservative estimate, verified through after-action reports and unit records, is at least 500 confirmed kills. And the cost? 2 SAS soldiers killed in action over 5 years. 2. The kill ratio is approximately 250 to 1. Even accounting for wounded, approximately 30 SAS soldiers wounded in action, the ratio is staggering, roughly 50 to 1 or higher. This is not because the Australians are supermen. This is because they control the terms of engagement. They fight only when the odds are in their favor. They strike only when the enemy is vulnerable, and they withdraw before the enemy can respond. The intelligence contribution is equally significant. Australian military intelligence assessments, declassified in the decades since the war, conclude that approximately 60% of the intelligence gathered by the 1st Australian Task Force comes from SAS patrols. These patrols identify enemy locations, movements, strengths, base camps, supply routes, and cache sites. This intelligence drives larger operations, directs artillery and airstrikes, and shapes the overall strategy in Phuoc Tuy Province. The SAS does not just kill the enemy. They find the enemy, watch the enemy, understand the enemy, and provide the information that allows the task force to disrupt and destroy enemy operations. This is the true value of reconnaissance. The killing is almost secondary. The knowledge is the weapon. In the Hat Dike region, a notorious Viet Cong stronghold in the mountains northwest of Nui Dat, Australian SAS patrols operate continuously from 1967 to 1969. The area is dense jungle, steep ridges, and narrow valleys, perfect terrain for ambushes. The VC use it as a base, a staging area for attacks on the Australian base and surrounding villages. The Australians infiltrate the Hat Dike on foot, moving at night, and spend weeks observing. They identify supply routes, rest areas, and command posts. They ambush supply columns, killing porters and destroying supplies. They ambush patrols, killing leaders and radio men. They do not attempt to hold ground. They strike and withdraw, then reappear days later in a different location and strike again. The VC, frustrated and demoralized, begin to avoid the Hat Dike. Movement through the area drops by an estimated 40% according to Australian intelligence assessments. The enemy has been forced to change their behavior, to abandon routes they have used for years because 6-man patrols have made the jungle too dangerous. The Battle of Long Tan, fought on August 18, 1966, provides context for the Australian approach. D Company, 6th Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, 108 men, encounters a Viet Cong force estimated at over 2,000 soldiers in a rubber plantation east of Nui Dat. The company is cut off, surrounded, under attack from 3 sides. The fighting is desperate. Close range, the Australians forming a defensive perimeter and holding on by their fingernails. Artillery fire from Nui Dat, danger close, smashes into the VC formations, breaking their attacks. An armored relief column, APCs carrying reinforcements and ammunition, fights through and reaches the company. The battle lasts 3 hours. When it ends, 18 Australians are dead, 24 wounded. The Viet Cong lose an estimated 245 men confirmed, possibly 500 or more killed and wounded. It is a stunning Australian victory, but it is also a warning. The VC are capable of massing large forces. They are capable of sustained combat. They are dangerous when they choose to fight. The lesson the Australians take from Long Tan is not that they should seek large battles, but that they should avoid them. Small unit tactics, ambushes, intelligence gathering. These are the tools that give them the advantage. Large battles are unpredictable, costly, and the enemy's choice of ground. Ambushes are controlled, calculated, and the Australians' choice. After Long Tan, the Viet Cong in Phuoc Tuy do not attempt another large-scale assault on the Australian base. They cannot afford the casualties. They return to guerrilla tactics, to small unit operations, to movement at night and ambushes of their own. And the Australians counter with the SAS, with patrols that make even guerrilla operations costly and dangerous. Years later, long after the war, Vietnamese veterans speak about the Australians. In interviews conducted in the 1990s and 2000s, after relations between Australia and Vietnam have normalized, former Viet Cong and NVA soldiers describe their experiences. One former VC officer says, "The Australians were different. They understood patience. They understood the jungle was not to be conquered but respected. We could hear the Americans coming from kilometers away, their helicopters, their radios, their movement. The Australians, we did not know they were there until we were dying." Another NVA veteran who fought in Phuoc Tuy says, "We feared the silent Australians more than the Americans with helicopters. The Americans you could hear. You could prepare. You could hide or run. The Australians appeared like ghosts. One moment, the trail was empty. The next, your comrades were dead and the enemy was gone. There is respect in these accounts, a professional acknowledgement of an effective adversary. There is also an admission of fear, the fear that comes from facing an enemy you cannot predict, cannot see, cannot counter." The tactic the Viet Cong could not counter was not a single technique. It was a comprehensive system. Reconnaissance to understand enemy patterns, patience to wait for the perfect moment, disciplined ambush execution to maximize effect, immediate withdrawal to deny response, and counter-tracking to prevent pursuit. Each element reinforced the others. Remove any one element and the system weakens. But together, they created a tactic that the enemy could not adapt to, because it gave them no opportunity to learn, no chance to respond, no way to turn the tables. By the time the enemy understood what had happened, the Australians were already kilometers away, preparing the next ambush, watching the next trail, waiting with the same inhuman patience for the next group of soldiers to walk into the trap. This is not to say the Australians were invincible, or that the tactic was without risk. Patrols were occasionally compromised, discovered by enemy trackers, or stumbled upon by larger forces. When this happened, the fight was desperate. The patrol would call for artillery, for helicopter extraction, and would fight a running battle to reach a landing zone. Some patrols were pinned down, surrounded, forced to call in danger close artillery to break contact. In these situations, the small size of the patrol was a disadvantage. 6 men cannot hold off 50 or 100 for long. But the training, the discipline, the skill of the SAS soldiers usually saw them through. They would break contact, evade, and survive. And the enemy paid heavily for every Australian casualty. The 2 SAS soldiers killed in action during the Vietnam deployment died in contacts where the enemy lost dozens. This is not cold comfort to the families of those men, but it is a testament to the effectiveness of the tactics and the quality of the soldiers. The legacy of the Australian SAS in Vietnam extends far beyond the body count or the intelligence reports. It is a legacy of doctrine, of proof that small, highly trained units, operating with patience and intelligence, can achieve strategic effects far beyond their numbers. This lesson has been absorbed by special forces around the world. The emphasis on small patrols, on reconnaissance, on ambush as a primary weapon, on counter-tracking and escape and evasion, all of these are now standard practice for counter-insurgency and unconventional warfare. The Australians did not invent these tactics. They learned them in Malaya, and before that the British learned them in colonial campaigns. But the Australians perfected them in Vietnam, proved them under fire, and demonstrated their effectiveness against a determined, skilled, and numerous enemy. In the years after the war, the Australian SAS continued to refine and teach these skills. The Vietnam experience became part of the regiment's institutional knowledge, passed down through training, through veteran instructors, through the stories and lessons learned in the jungle. When Australian special forces deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in the 21st century, they brought those lessons with them. The tactics adapted to desert and mountain terrain, to a different enemy, to different technology, but the principles remain the same: reconnaissance, patience, controlled violence, and withdrawal. The silent professionals, the ghosts in the jungle, became ghosts in the desert and the mountains. The enemy changed. The tactics endured. For the Viet Cong and NVA in Phuoc Tuy Province, the Australian presence was a constant, grinding pressure. They could not move freely. They could not use their traditional routes. They could not relax, even on familiar trails, even in areas they considered safe. Every step was dangerous. Every movement could be the one that walked into the ambush. This pressure, sustained over years, degraded their effectiveness, reduced their morale, and forced them to divert resources to security and counter-tracking that could have been used for offensive operations. By 1969, the Viet Cong in Phuoc Tuy were a shadow of what they had been in 1966. The D445 Battalion, once a formidable local force, was reduced to a few hundred men hiding in the mountains, avoiding contact. The larger regiments, the 274th and 275th, had withdrawn to Cambodia to refit and recruit. The villages, once dominated by the VC, were largely under South Vietnamese government control. This shift was not solely due to Australian operations. American and South Vietnamese forces played a role, as did civic action programs, pacification efforts, and political changes. But the Australian contribution, particularly the SAS, was significant and disproportionate to their numbers. On the morning of June 17, 1967, 6 Australian SAS soldiers returned to their base at Nui Dat after a week in the mountains. They are filthy, exhausted, their uniforms rotting with sweat and mold, their skin covered in insect bites and leech scars. They walk to the operations tent, report to the intelligence officer, and debrief. The patrol commander describes the ambush. 12 enemy killed, no friendly casualties. Withdrawal without contact. The intelligence officer makes notes, asks questions, thanks them. The patrol is dismissed. The men walk to their tent, strip off their gear, and collapse onto their bunks. They do not talk about what happened. There is no bravado, no celebration. It is what they do. It is what they will do again in a week when the next mission comes. They will go back into the jungle, back into the silence, back into the waiting. They will watch the trails, set the ambush, and strike when the moment is perfect. And the enemy will die without knowing who killed them, without understanding how, without ever seeing the men who made the jungle their weapon. This is the tactic the Viet Cong could not counter. This is the reason the enemy feared the Australians. Not their firepower, not their numbers, but their patience, their discipline, their understanding that the jungle does not belong to the loudest army. It belongs to the silent one. It belongs to those who wait, who watch, who strike without warning and vanish without a trace. It belongs to the hunters, not the hunted. And in Phuoc Tuy Province, from 1966 to 1971, the Australians were the hunters. The Viet Cong, for all their skill and courage and determination, were the prey. If this story has shown you a side of the Vietnam war you never knew, if it has given you a new respect for the silent professionals who fight not for glory but for mission, for comrades, for the discipline that defines them, then do something for me. Subscribe to Vietnam War Records. Share this story. Make sure that the men who fought in the shadows, who won their battles without headlines, who came home without parades, are remembered. It's to be a vegetable. Because history is not just the big battles and the famous generals. History is also the 6-man patrol in the jungle, the 3-day wait in the mud, the 15-second ambush that changed the enemy's behavior and saved Australian lives. That history matters. Those men matter. And their story, the tactic the Viet Cong could not counter, deserves to be told.